Spooky story time. A follower named Allie sent us this story and we're going to call it House on the Hill. Allie says that when she was 17 years old, her and her family moved into this house and everything seemed perfectly normal, like literally for a few years, and then something changed. She says that she had gotten home one night from the movie theater and she goes to her bedroom, she's relaxing on her bed, and she hears like the kitchen chairs just shuffling around. She gets up, nothing's there. She tells her parents when they get home and they try to investigate. They don't see anything, and it was at that moment that she remembers that all this craziness and madness started happening. Her dad started seeing shadow figures and stuff like that, and it was during COVID time that unfortunately her grandmother did pass. So Allie's mom brought in a pastor to come and bless their home. Immediately, the pastor felt like this uneasy feeling, and he started cleansing the house room by room. He gets to a specific room and asks the mom, "Whose room is this?" And mom says, "It's my daughter Allie's room." And he says, "There's something in here with her." Again, things were happening all the time, and about a year later, they have a gathering, and Allie's mom has friends over. One of her friends walks into the house and immediately refuses to stay. He's like, "I'm out of here." Allie's mom is like, "What's going on? Are you okay? Like, what happened?" And he's like, "There's something not good in this house, and it's feeding off of you guys. Like, I can't stay here." Another time, Allie's mom is walking outside, taking out the trash, and there's this man driving up and down the road, kind of looking at her, and he stops Allie's mom. He then proceeds and asks the mom, "Do you live in this house?" And she's like, "Yeah, why?" He then tells her, "Did you know that someone unalived themselves in the back room? No one ever stays here long." They ended up living in this house for about 7 years. When it was time for them to move, everybody was packing, and Allie's dad grabs all the packages and boxes from Allie's room, and while he's doing so, he says that he clearly hears a little girl telling him bye. Immediately, he books it, he's out of this motherfucker, and he tells Allie's mom, "Don't you dare ask me to go back into that house because I am not going to." He explained what he heard. Of course, Allie's mom believed him because there's been so many experiences going on. How could you not? Although they didn't leave because of the paranormal activity, Allie says that it completely stopped as soon as they left and they moved into a different home. That tells me that whatever was lingering is attached to the house and thankfully not attached to them. What do you guys think? Thank you so much to Allie for sending me this spooky story. If you guys have any other stories that you'd like to share, please send them via DM or email, and I'd love to read them, and I will see you guys in the next spooky story. Bye!
As many of you know, I grew up in deep Appalachia. I now live in Atlanta, Georgia, and there are times where I'll tell my friends stories from what happened to me when I lived out there, and they're like, "What?" I already posted about my UFO story last year, and that video got to like 3 million views. But today, I'm going to tell you guys the story of when I was a kid and I encountered a skinwalker, or at least what I thought was a skinwalker. I hate long intros, so I'm just going to get into the story. The place I lived was a place called Jasper, Georgia. It's right next to LJ. And I lived in the place where the show Squidbillies was based on, and we have a Squidbillies shrine in our town center. I had a friend that I would stay with pretty often, and her family owned a 300-acre farm. And when I say family, it's just her and her mom who live there. And so they have like all these farm animals, and they have different parts of their land that you have to walk through trails in the woods to get through. Like, in order to get to one barn, you have to walk through the woods for like 10 minutes just to get there. So there was one day that I was sleeping over there, and we had been home alone all day. I was probably in 3rd grade when this happened. Some of you might ask why me and my friend were just like 2 3rd graders alone on this farm. And it was because my parents were getting a divorce, and so I needed a place to go, so I pretty much lived with this girl at the time. But back to the story. So my friend's mom was on the way home, but I guess there was like a lot of traffic, or she was running late or something. So she called my friend and she asked her if we could like go down to one of the barns and feed the horses before we went to bed. So at this point in time, it was probably like 8 o'clock. The sun was going down. It was about to be nighttime. You could still see the sun and the light when you're in the open field, but in the woods, it was like pretty dark. Like there was no sunlight. So my friend and I started walking through the pasture to the woods, and she had a flashlight with her. We got to the woods, she turned the flashlight on, and we started walking. We were walking for maybe like 3 or 4 minutes through these woods, so we're about halfway through the trail, and we're just talking about some shit and laughing. And then all of a sudden, my friend just stops talking, and like I was kind of just like looking at her, like as we were speaking. I wasn't really looking in front of me. And then she just like drops the flashlight and starts sprinting in the opposite direction, like back to the house. And so I was like, "You okay, Rebecca?" And because that was her name. And I turn and I see her sprinting, and the flashlight was just like on the floor in front of me. And I was like, "What the fuck?" So I turn back in front of me, and I just see like maybe like 10 feet away this gigantic like white figure. And I didn't look at it for long, but just like the sheer height of this thing, whatever the fuck it was, scared me so badly that I looked at it and immediately was like fight or flight mode. Like I felt danger. So right when I looked at it, I turned the other way and fucking booked it. I was running faster than I'd ever ran before. So fast that I passed my friend, and I was like running and pissing my pants at the same time. Like that's how fucking scary it was. And so I ran all the way back to her house, and in my brain I was like, what is the one place I can hide right now where no one will find me? And the only thing I could think of was like I just ran to the laundry room and I got in the dryer. And so I was just sitting in the dryer, and it was like one of those old school dryers. It wasn't like plastic clear cover, so it was just like a white door that closes it from the front. And so I was just in there. I was like curled up in a ball, and I waited like, I don't know, what seemed like 15-20 minutes. I was just in there covered in piss, and eventually I thought that whatever the fuck was in the woods had like killed my friend. And so I was just crying, and like I was freaking out, but I was also terrified and didn't want to die. So I was just sitting in there. And then eventually my friend walks through the door, and I can tell that she's crying and she's like hyperventilating. She's like like I hear that. And so I open the dryer, and she's like scared when I open it, obviously. And I was just like also crying, and we hug each other, and I was like, "Where did you go?" And so she told me that she had ran and she got into like this trailer that was kind of near the house, because it was the only place she could think of to hide. And so we were both hiding, and I guess she just like mustered up the courage to run to the main house. And so we were both just like trying to explain what we saw and like put together whatever the fuck that was. And this was like 2008, maybe 2009. So I think I was like 12 or something when this happened, but this was way before like creepypasta or like any of these stories were like even around. So we couldn't even put a name to like what the fuck we saw out there. And so when her mom finally got home, we tried to explain what just happened, and she just like dismissed us, and she was like, "You girls are just like overreacting. You guys saw a bear or like a deer or something," which is still terrifying if we saw a bear, but it definitely was not a bear, because this thing was like pure white. And in the dark, it's like the only thing you can really see is like, if there's someone standing in front of you with a white t-shirt, like you're gonna see that. But this thing was completely white, and that's all I remember is just like this gigantic, like 7 or 8 foot tall thing just like standing right in front of me, staring at me. And so I'm not friends with this girl anymore. I haven't talked to her in probably like 15 years. But I just remember that story, and I remember being so scared that I pissed myself. and the only thing I could think of that being is like a skinwalker. So maybe that is a skinwalker. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that story. I've never told that on here, so I hope you guys were entertained and enjoyed it, and maybe got scared. But anyways, later this week I'm gonna post another story about the Appalachian feral people, because I think I also had an experience with that when I was younger. There was a lot of weird shit that happened. But yeah, thank you guys.
Can you do cat scratch? Okay, this one seems pretty harmless until an invisible cat leaves red claw marks all over your back. This is cat scratch. It's a game that's usually played at sleepovers. To play, you need at least 2 people. One person lies down with their head in your lap. If there are others around, they can sit in a circle around you. Then you're gonna gently rub the other person's temples and begin telling this creepy story about a cat. There was once an old lady who owned a cat. The cat was very nice. It meowed and purred. One day the cat got hit by a car and died. Cat scratch, cat scratch, cat scratch. The old lady got a new cat. This one was mean, it hissed and clawed. Cat scratch, cat scratch, cat scratch. One day that cat also got hit by a car and died. The old lady decided not to get any more cats. Cat scratch, cat scratch, cat scratch. Once you finish the story, the other person will sit up and lift the back of their shirt, and if you did the ritual right, you will see long red claw marks running across their back. But the creepiest part is they don't feel a thing. I have never heard of this game until now, but apparently it's super popular and some people swear it works. Some believe when you are playing this game, you are summoning something much more sinister than just an invisible cat. Let me know if you've ever played this game before or if you're thinking about trying it. Y'all have the creepiest suggestions and I love them, so keep them coming.
Imagine being in a classroom like this, basically studying, then all of a sudden and out of nowhere, you see a jinn in front of you. That's exactly what happened in northern Malaysia in 2019. See, there was a girl in the classroom who was basically writing, and out of nowhere, she started screaming like, ah! But when she started screaming out of nowhere, the whole class woke up. They were like, bro, what the hell is wrong with you? Now, just like the girl, everybody in the class started screaming. So this is where the teacher turned his head. He was like, come on guys, my explanation can't be that bad. Yes, the whole classroom right now is basically screaming and panicking. Even the teacher, he's screaming too. Now you might ask, bro, why the hell are they screaming? This is why they were screaming. The whole class basically saw something like this in the back of the classroom. The whole class saw a tall silhouette that looked like a shadow with red eyes, and they immediately assumed that it was a jinn. Now when they all saw that scary jinn in the back of the class, basically not moving and staring at them, they all started crying and calling for help. When the rest of the school heard this specific classroom screaming, they immediately came, but the problem is, by that time, the jinn already disappeared. So this is where the school decided to call for any help they can get. They even called the police. And when police finally arrived, the students started explaining what they saw, and this is where police were like, okay bro, hold on. We can't even see the jinn you're talking about. How do you want us to arrest it? Obviously, police in this case, they couldn't help. I mean, because they can't see or understand what the students are talking about. In this moment right here, the school officially decided to shut down until the problem is solved. They basically told everybody to go home, and since the majority of people in Malaysia are Muslim, they decided to call an imam. Yes, an imam came to that school and he did a thing called ruqya, which is supposed to scare or keep the jinn away. And when the imam did his thing, the school reopened again a few days after, and nothing happened after it. Many people believe that this school was built close or on top of an old graveyard, and it's believed that you shouldn't live or stay close to these places. That's why the jinn came to say hi. Now, this was probably traumatizing for everybody in that school, you know, the students, the teacher, or everybody that experienced it. But W jinn for real, because thanks to that jinn that decided to randomly show up and traumatize everybody, they didn't have school for so many days. And I mean, even when the school reopened after, they had a valid reason to skip it. And talking to that jinn, if you're seeing this video, please show up to the class tomorrow, to my class. Not tonight, tomorrow. You know, I have 2 hours, I don't want to do them.
Can we show them the older homestead?
Yeah, let's go. As you know.
No, it's not. No, it's not. Was that you?
Yeah, that's on either side.
They went to both.
Yeah.
End of 2002, 36-year-old Boyd Taylor was single, he had no children, and he lived with his divorced father, Robert, in a small bungalow in the northern England countryside. In addition to living with his father, Boyd also worked for his father. His father, Robert, owned a small construction business, and so the father-son duo built houses in the area. While Boyd might have envisioned his life turning out in a different, more exciting way, he didn't seem outwardly unhappy about his circumstances. In fact, he seemed very cheerful, both at work and when he was at home. But despite his cheerfulness, his father, Robert, was still pretty concerned about him, because every time Boyd had some time off from work and was just at loose ends, he wouldn't go out with his friends. In fact, he really didn't have any friends and wasn't even trying to make any friends. Instead, he would just sit in his room all day and be totally by himself. Now, Robert knew his son was naturally a bit of a loner and always had been, but a part of him hoped that his son would just start going out and meeting new people, or at the very least, develop some sort of hobby that could occupy his mind. In late September of 2002, Robert was walking down the hallway of their bungalow when he passed by his son's bedroom door, and it was shut, and as he walked past, he heard inside of his son's room the sound of his son sawing some wood. And so he stopped for a second and he just listened, and when the sawing stopped for a second, Robert just knocked on the door. He was curious. He wanted to know what his son was doing. Boyd, instead of coming over to the door and opening it up and talking to his dad, instead just paused for a second and then said, "What is it, Dad? What do you need?" And Robert would say, "Well, I heard sawing and I just wanted to know what you were building." And so Boyd pauses again and then just says, "Well, I'm working on a woodworking project." And so Robert's like, "Well, can I poke my head in and actually see what you're building?" And Boyd, again, without opening the door, just tells his dad very politely that he wants to be left alone. And so Robert decides not to push the issue. Whatever he was doing, it was his business. And so he just told his son that, hey, if you need any help with anything, let me know. I'd be glad to help. And then Robert walked away. Over the next 2 months, every time Boyd was not working, so in the evenings and on the weekend, he would be locked inside of his bedroom, hammering and sawing away at this woodworking project. And over those 2 months, Robert would periodically walk down the hall and stand in front of his son's bedroom and knock on the door and try to get his son to let him in to just see what he was up to, not only because he just wanted to see what his son was doing, but because Robert was a carpenter by trade and so was just genuinely interested. But every time he asked to be let in, Boyd would very politely tell his father that he really just wants to be left alone, and Robert respected his wishes. In early December, Boyd approached his father and said, "Hey, would it be possible for me to take the next month off from work so I can focus on this woodworking project?" Now, for Robert, this was a massive inconvenience. This construction business that he owned was really just he and his son building the houses. And so if his son was not going to be working, then Robert would be solo on all of his projects for that month. But Robert's thinking to himself, my son has finally found a hobby that he's really into. I don't really know what it is, but clearly he's invested in it. And so he tells his son, "You know what? That's fine. You take the whole month, and if you want more time in January, that's fine. You just let me know." So starting that first week in December, every time Robert would leave the house to go to work in the morning, he would leave to the sound of Boyd in his bedroom hammering and sawing and tinkering away at his woodworking project. And then several hours later, when Robert finally came back home, he'd walk into the house, and the first thing he would hear is his son still in his bedroom, still hammering and sawing away. When December finally ended and Robert expected his son to be done with his project and to finally show him what he's been working on, Boyd approached him and said, "Well, Dad, I'm not quite done with the project. I need about 2 more weeks." And so Robert said, "No problem. We'll talk in 2 weeks." So December rolled into January, and Boyd just continued to work all day long inside of his bedroom. Then on the evening of January 7th, Robert was home. He was watching TV in the living room, and Boyd was hard at work in his bedroom right down the hall when Robert decided he was tired and he was going to go to bed. So he stands up, turns the TV off, he leaves the living room, he goes down the hallway with his son's room on the right, and as he passed, he can hear his son at work, and he kind of yells to his son that he's going to bed, and then Robert goes into his bedroom, crawls into his bed, and falls asleep. At 3:30 a.m. the following morning, Robert is suddenly awoken by this incredibly loud crashing sound somewhere in his house. Robert's first thought was the chimney must have collapsed. That was how loud the sound was. And so he leaps out of his bed, he runs out of his door, he goes down the hallway, past his son's room, into the living room, room and he looks at the fireplace, which is in the TV room, and clearly the chimney has not collapsed onto itself. And so he's standing there thinking, what else could that sound have been? And then he's thinking to himself, well, did I really hear that sound, or was that sound in my dream? And I kind of thought it was real, but it really wasn't. And so just to be sure, he walked all around the house, kind of seeing if there were any signs of something big falling and crashing on the ground, but the house seemed totally in order. And so he walked back down the hallway towards his bedroom, and he stopped right outside of his son's room, and he considered knocking and waking his son up to see if maybe he had heard this loud sound too. But when he listened to the door, it was quiet inside, so he figured, what, my son's asleep, I'm not going to wake him up for this. And so Robert just went into his bedroom and he went back to sleep. A few hours later, Robert got up and he left his bedroom, he went into the kitchen and he made himself some food. And as he's preparing his food, he's realizing that he doesn't hear the sound of Boyd working in his bedroom, because normally Boyd would be working that early in the morning, but he wasn't. And so right before Robert left to go to work that day, he actually walked down the hall and listened to his son's bedroom to hear if maybe he was at work in there, but he just hadn't heard him. But it was totally silent in the room. And so he reached down to the doorknob, thinking maybe he could just poke his head in and see if his son was on his bed. But when he tried the doorknob, it was locked. So Robert just thought to himself, okay, I guess Boyd is sleeping in this morning, and so I'm not going to bother him. And so Robert leaves the house, he gets into his truck, and he drives off to work. And then several hours later, he comes back to the house at night, and he walks inside, and the first thing he hears is nothing. It's silent. And this house in the evenings for the past several months was never quiet. Boyd was always hammering, sawing, and tinkering away at this woodworking project. And so right away, Robert's thinking to himself, maybe he's done with the project and I can finally see this thing he's been working on.
If you want to buy a house, always check with the one who was living there before you. A family of 4 members decided to buy a house in Egypt. They were like, okay, sure, it is expensive, but you know what, we're taking it. The family decided to live there normally, but things started getting weird already in the first day. Before I tell you what happened, you know what to do. Save this video, come back to it at night so it's more enjoyable like that. I was saying that things got weird, but especially windows started opening and closing by themselves. Maybe you're like, okay, that happens often, like some type of wind, I don't know. No, story takes place in summer and in Egypt, one of the hottest countries in the world. Oh, Egypt and wind in the same sentence? No. Even with that, the family made sure to close them very well, but they will just find them open. When the family saw that, especially the mother, she immediately went to her son. She was like, don't worry, everything is fine, the thing is not functioning, that's it. Her child was like, okay mom, but why this only happens at night? The mom was like, I don't have no explanation to that, but we'll get it fixed, It was day 1. A weird thing with the windows, but maybe that was a coincidence. Day 2 arrived. So this time, the family decided to wake up early in the morning to explore what's next to them. The family woke up, but one of them didn't want to. Let's call him the little boy. The parents went to the little boy trying to wake him up. They were like, okay, come on, wake up. Your sister is coming, come on. The little boy was like, nah, I'm tired from yesterday. Can you please go without me? I'm trying to sleep. Family were like, okay, we respect that. We're letting you alone. We're leaving, okay? While the boy was sleeping, he heard the very loud music coming from his parents' room. He was like, oh my god, these people can't let me sleep, man. He decided to go to his parents' room to see what's happening there, why the music is so loud. Then he stopped walking and realized something. He was like, bro, my family are outside. How's the music so loud? How's that even possible? Maybe they left the TV, the radio, I don't know. Let's check in anyway. So he opened the room, the music stopped immediately. The little boy was like, huh? How's that even possible? Especially that the family just moved here, so they don't have a TV or radio in that room. The family came back to their house. They found the boy awake. They were like, hi, you slept well? Little boy was like, no, I didn't sleep well, if that was your question. Because I won't say that because my dad would beat the shit out of me, but someone there was playing loud music. Mom was like, hold on. In which room and what type of music you hear? Little boy was like, some kind of old music was playing so loud in your room. Mom was like, oh, old music, yeah, it makes gotta be the neighbors who live next to us, Little boy was like, mom, the music was literally playing in your room. His mom was like, shh, I'm sure it was the neighbors, don't worry. This is an actual footage of the house, and we arrived at the 3rd day. This day is where the whole family started hearing things. Started hearing a conversation between 2 people. One male and one female. They sounded like they were fighting each other. See, nobody was in that house except the family. The mom came up with the neighbor excuse again, but this time she knew that something was going on. When they convinced the children that those are the neighbors, the parents want to hear what's going on. Parents described the conversation. They were like, we were hearing it all around us, and it was between the walls. If that makes sense to you, but kinda understand what they were trying to say. The female that was talking was screaming and crying, and the man was talking like he was her husband. Minutes later, everything stopped, but now they started hearing footsteps next to them. They hear the sound of the door getting open. They hear the elevator. And remember, all of this only happens at night. This is where the dad decided to show up. He was like, let's ask the neighbors if they're hearing the same thing. The mom decided to not too. She was like, you'll only scare the children. Let's ask tomorrow morning. I promise you nothing will happen. Now we entered day 4. And if you're asking, the dad already asked some neighbors. The neighbors were like, no, we didn't hear anything. Even the children noticed that something isn't alright. Now the window things that happens every night. Loud music that the little boy heard. Conversation they listening to. The footsteps, even the elevator. What I'm gonna tell you now is what made the family leave this house. Mother saw a shadow of a woman entering between the walls. She saw that and she couldn't believe what she saw. But you know what she did? She made sure that everybody else in the family didn't see what she saw. Immediately left the house and started asking who was living here before. You know, she started asking random people in the street. People were like, we don't know. And she asked somebody who seemed to know because he was a guard working nearby. He was like, are you serious? I was like, yeah. The guard was like, you're not joking. You really live here. Guard was like, what I'm about to tell you is crazy, but it is really the truth. Like, you're living next to a really famous person that used to be a singer. And her name is Dikra. Dikra in the same place you're in. Music that the little boy heard in the parents' room was her singing. Woman that the mother saw was also her. Discussion they were hearing was her and her husband. Call it a jinn, a spirit, a ghost, call it whatever you want. The thing is, they were living with a person this whole time. Family obviously left this house, and the house now is very known for what happened with this family in Egypt.
What the fuck was that? Bro!
What's going on around you?
I don't know. I'm frozen. I am frozen.
Did the window
Sean.
break?
My grandma always used to tell me that nothing good happens between the hours of midnight and 4 a.m. She would say, those are the devil hours. Do not go out during that time. And, you know, I always tell people, if you don't believe any of this stuff, right, go out after midnight into the woods alone and then tell me what you think. Now, many years ago when I was younger, I had just gotten out of the military, and I was kind of adjusting to this regular civilian life. Now, one of the things that helped me is I got into doing outdoor survival. Now, I used to do these 4 to 5 mile backpacking hikes where I would go out sometimes 12:30, 1 o'clock at night and hike in the woods. This particular area that I would hike was along the river. It was like this hill, and it was just this heavily wooded area. Now, at the time, right, this area was known to be home to the Peoria Indians. And this is where they hunted. This is where they lived. There's even believed to be this huge burial ground on this area that was never found. So this particular night, I decided to hike this trail called the Pimatui. Now, the Pimatui was an old Native American trail they used to use to get down this hill to the river. So what I would do is I would hike this trail, and I would get to this specific spot where there was a stream that cut through the trail. I would then turn right, and I would follow this stream through a ravine down to the river. So as I'm hiking the Pimatui Trail, I come to the stream, I turn right, and I start following along down this ravine. I start hearing like music, and it sounded like someone was singing, but it wasn't like a person. It was like one of those old music boxes. And as I kept on walking further and further, like it got a little louder and then a little louder. And that's when I get to the specific spot of this stream where it kind of makes a curve, and there's this sharp ravine with 2 steep sides on both sides. And I remember hearing this music like coming from the side of this cliff. And I'm like, what is making that music? Like, where is that coming from? And that's when I see like this opening on the side of the ravine. And, you know, it was probably about this wide. You could, you know, barely crawl through it. And it was some kind of cave or something. So I hiked up to the top of this hill, and I started shining my light into this cave. As I look in there, I see the movement of something very large. And I don't exactly know what it was. I can't explain to you what it looked like, but it caused me to like jump back. And at the time I'm thinking, okay, if this is some kind of wild animal, I'm blocking its only exit. So I started making my way back up the ravine and heading away from there. And as I'm walking, I notice like all this movement up ahead in the woods. And I see several deer just booking it through the woods like something had just scared it. And I could hear from behind me some movement coming up through the woods. And there were like branches breaking, and you could hear the crunch of something hitting the leaves. I go a little faster now because I'm kind of nervous. I'm like, what is following me? As I'm, continuing up the ravine, it starts getting closer and closer. And it got to the point where I knew that it was very, very close. So I pull my camera out and I take a picture with the flash on. And when that flash hit, I could see two glowing eyes staring at me. So I threw my bag down and I just take off running as fast as I can. I get to the trail, I get out of there. And whatever this was, it broke off. It didn't follow me. Later that night, I'm looking at this picture and you could clearly see the two eyes. And I'm like, whoa, something was following me, whatever was in that cave. The next day, I hiked back out to this area because I wanted to find this cave again. Except I could not find it anywhere. And I went all the way along that ravine down to the river. There was no cave. And I still to this day have no idea what happened that night or what was following me.